Welcome back. I've got a special story to share today.
Sign it before the pie is served, Cassandra, or I promise you my son will file for an annulment by Monday morning. Eleanor's voice was quiet. That was the most terrifying thing about my mother-in-law. She never yelled. She had spent 62 years perfecting a specific frequency of calm that made you feel the floorboards shifting beneath your feet. It was the kind of calm designed to remind you exactly how small, how replaceable, and how utterly insignificant you were in her grand, ancestral house. I looked down at the document sitting next to my bone china dessert plate. It was a post-nuptial agreement. 14 pages long. I knew immediately it had been drafted by the most ruthless family law firm in the state, designed to strip me of absolutely every marital asset if Elliot and I ever divorced. It was printed on thick, heavy cream cardstock. The kind of paper that costs more per sheet than my mother used to make in an hour at the diner. Someone had laid a silver Mont Blanc pen beside it, parallel to my dessert fork, as if it were simply a new piece of cutlery required for the holiday dinner. Elliot, my husband of 3 years, sat directly across from me at the massive mahogany dining table. He was staring at his crystal wine glass with the intense, laser-like focus of a man who had decided the safest survival strategy for the evening was to turn completely invisible. He would not look at me. He had not caught my eye since we pulled through the sprawling wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate 2 long hours ago. At the head of the table, his father Richard was methodically cutting a slice of glazed ham. His movements were slow, precise, and completely relaxed. He carried the aura of a man who believed the game was already won. To his right, my sister-in-law Vivienne was performing her usual theatrical indifference, examining her flawless French manicure. Beside her sat Harrison, her husband. Harrison was the family's enforcer. He was currently refilling his wine glass, watching me with a tight, satisfied smile. It was the exact look of a bystander watching a car crash happen in slow motion, knowing he had a safe seat behind the guardrail. This was Thanksgiving at the Sterlings. This is exactly what I had married into 3 years ago, when I was 31 years old and foolishly, dangerously naive enough to believe that romantic love was an effective armor against generational wealth and active malice. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story hits close to home. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Have you ever had to sit at a table full of people who smiled at you while meticulously planning your total destruction? If you have, stay with me, because tonight, we weren't just eating turkey. Tonight was the expiration date on my silence. Eleanor folded her manicured hands over the antique lace tablecloth. She looked at me using the exact expression she reserved for caterers who brought out the wrong hors d'oeuvres or landscapers, who failed to trim the hydrangeas to her precise geometric standards. "Cassandra," she said, managing to make my legal name sound like a minor, distasteful inconvenience. "You are a pragmatic girl. I have always said that about you. You are smart enough to understand what this family represents. The Sterling name opens doors that most common people spend entire lifetimes standing firmly outside of." She paused, taking a delicate sip of ice water. "What we are asking isn't unreasonable. It is simply a formality." A formality. I repeated, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Elliot's grandfather built this family's real estate portfolio from the ground up," Richard chimed in, setting down his heavy silver fork. "We protect what was built. It is nothing personal, Cassandra. It is just business." "It feels quite personal," I said, my heart matching the slow, heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Vivienne looked up from her nails. She smiled at me. It was the specific, venomous smile she had been perfecting since the very first day Elliot brought me to this house. The smile that said she found my presence amusing, the way one finds a stray dog wandering into a ballroom amusing. Affectionately condescending, but ready to call animal control. "No one is attacking you, Cassie," Vivienne said lightly. "We just think that, Given your background, it is deeply reasonable to have certain legal protections in place. You came into this family with nothing. We simply desire total clarity on what leaves with you if things don't work out. Your background. Those two words had stalked me through the echoing halls of this estate for 3 years. Your background. It was their polite, sanitized code for the small, drafty apartment in Akron, Ohio, where I grew up. It meant the fact that my mother worked double shifts at a roadside diner, coming home smelling of stale coffee and industrial bleach. It meant that I had not been born into a lineage that commanded respect, so the only logical conclusion was that I had seduced their son to gain access to theirs. They had never once asked what I actually did for a living. Not really. Not with an ounce of genuine curiosity or respect. Early on in our relationship, Elliot had vaguely mentioned to them that I ran a small software consulting firm. Alina had nodded the same way you nod when a child tells you they have opened a lemonade stand. Polite, entirely dismissive, and utterly uninterested. The topic was never raised again. To the Sterlings, I was nothing more than a pretty, impoverished girl from nowhere. I had charmed their golden boy into putting a ring on my finger, and mathematically speaking, I was destined to drain his trust fund the moment the marriage hit a speed bump. They weren't entirely wrong about me being strategic. They were just catastrophically wrong about which one of us was sitting at the chessboard. "I am not signing it," I said. The dining room went completely deathly still. The clinking of silverware stopped. Elliot finally, agonizingly, lifted his eyes to meet mine. His expression was a tragic cocktail of guilt, warning, and creeping panic. He looked like a man who slowly realized he had made a compounding series of catastrophic decisions and was now watching the bill come due in real time. "Cassie," Elliot started, his voice a pathetic, wavering croak. "I am not signing it," I repeated, matching Alina's calm, measured frequency. I had been practicing it for weeks. Richard leaned back heavily in his grand, carved leather chair. "Then I want you to fully comprehend what that means. I have a conference call scheduled with our lead attorney at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We will begin the annulment process immediately on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation." "Fraudulent misrepresentation?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "That is a fascinating choice of legal terminology." Harrison finally spoke up. He was the family's attack dog, the one they deployed when they wanted to deliver financial threats wrapped in legalese. He had attended Yale Law, a fact he mentioned the way normal people mention the weather. Constantly, and as a basic foundation of reality. "Cassandra, we have done rigorous due diligence," Harrison said smugly, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "We know your little company's last filed revenue. We know exactly what it is. A mere $45,000 last year." He paused, letting the pathetic number hang in the stale, wealthy air. "We are not here to publicly humiliate you. We are here to protect the Sterling family assets." I stared at Harrison for a long, silent moment. I pressed my palm flat against the cool mahogany table. $45,000 a year. That was the number they had found. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the culmination of 3 years of silence shifting in my chest. If you've ever been in a situation where your family refused to hear your side, where the truth didn't matter because someone else's lie was louder, drop a fire emoji in the comments. And if you think my in-laws are going to regret this, type karma. Let's keep going, because what happened next? Even I didn't see it coming. But before we get to the reckoning, I need to take you back. I need to take you back 3 years to the night I first realized my husband was a ghost, and the Sterling family was a prison disguised as a palace. The first time I met Elliot Sterling was at a logistics tech conference in Chicago. It was a torrential Tuesday night, and the hotel lobby bar was packed. He had spilled black coffee down the front of his crisp white shirt and burst into genuine, self-deprecating laughter. He didn't look flustered. He didn't look angry. He just laughed at himself with an ease I had never seen in corporate men. That was what drew me to him. I thought, that is a person who isn't performing. That is someone real. At the time, I didn't know who his family was. I didn't know the name Sterling was etched into half the commercial real estate facades in Hartford. I was 29. I was the founder of Pinnacle Data Solutions, but I was running it out of a co-working space, eating instant noodles, and sleeping 4 hours a night. I was building predictive algorithms for freight shipping. It was brutally unglamorous work, but I knew, with absolute terrifying certainty, that it was going to revolutionize the supply chain industry. Elliot was a junior vice president at a marketing firm, a job his father had arranged. He was sweet, attentive, and completely unbothered by my 80-hour work weeks. "I love how ambitious you are," he told me one night, sitting on the cheap rug in my studio apartment. "You're going to build something amazing, Cassie." He said the words, but looking back, I realize he didn't actually believe them. He viewed my company as a passionate hobby, something cute, something that kept me occupied while he golfed with his Yale fraternity brothers. He fundamentally lacked the capacity to imagine a woman from Akron, Ohio, building a billion-dollar empire. The illusion of our equality shattered the moment he took me home to Connecticut to meet his parents. It was Christmas Eve, our first holiday together. We pulled up to a house that looked like it belonged on a historical registry. 4 towering columns, a circular driveway lined with dormant oak trees, and windows glowing with warm, exclusionary gold light. Eleanor greeted us in the grand foyer. She looked me up and down, her eyes performing an instantaneous, devastating appraisal of my navy blue dress. It was a nice dress. I had spent $400 on it, which felt like a fortune. But under Eleanor's gaze, the fabric suddenly felt cheap, thin, and entirely inappropriate. "You must be Cassandra," she said, offering a hand that was cold and entirely void of pressure. "Elliot has told us so little about you, only that you run a small internet business." "It's a data analytics firm, actually," I said, trying to project confidence. Eleanor smiled a frosty, tight smile. "How modern. Please come into the drawing room. The adults are having cocktails." The adults. I was 29 years old. I had 12 employees relying on me to make payroll. But in that foyer, I was instantly demoted to a child who had wandered into the wrong country club. That night at dinner, the pattern of my erasure officially began. The Sterlings spoke exclusively in a language composed of shared histories, boarding school references, and overlapping social circles. They did not ask me a single question about myself. When I tried to contribute to a conversation about the local economy, Richard talked over me as if I hadn't produced sound. "The commercial sector in Hartford is uniquely resilient," Richard boomed, passing the prime rib. "Harrison has been navigating the zoning boards brilliantly. It's about pedigree, you see, understanding the old money currents." I sat in silence for the next 40 minutes. I watched Elliot. He was laughing at his father's jokes, perfectly camouflaged in his natural habitat. He didn't notice my silence. He didn't notice that his sister Vivienne intentionally skipped over my wine glass when pouring the Cabernet. Later that evening, while Elliot was downstairs playing billiards with Harrison, Eleanor found me in the library. I was looking at a first edition of The Great Gatsby, seeking temporary sanctuary. She closed the heavy oak door behind her. The click of the brass latch sounded like a vault locking. "I want to be brutally honest with you, Cassandra, because I believe honesty is a form of respect," Eleanor said, sitting gracefully in a wingback leather chair. She didn't offer me a seat. I remained standing. "Elliot is generous. He loves easily and he trusts easily. Those are beautiful qualities in a boy." She intentionally used the word boy. "But they are also massive vulnerabilities. I need you to completely understand that this family will always protect its own borders." She looked at my $400 dress. "Whatever your intentions are, and I will politely take you at your word that they are rooted in affection, I need you to know that we are watching. The sterling wealth is meant for sterlings. I hope we understand each other." I left that room with my chest tight, the oxygen trapped in my lungs. My mother had never once spoken to any person I brought home like that. My mother would have offered them coffee, asked them about their dreams, and been immensely grateful for anyone who made me smile. I told myself that night that it was just protectiveness. I told myself Elliot was worth it. But looking back, I know exactly why I stayed for 3 agonizing years. Growing up as an only child in Akron with a mother working double shifts, I had always desperately craved a big, loud family. Elliot knew exactly how to weaponize that hunger. Behind closed doors, away from his mother, he was intensely affectionate. He would hold me, promise me we were building our own safe harbor, and act like we were a team surviving his difficult family. He trauma-bonded me to his potential. That was the moment I should have walked out the door and never looked back. But hope is a toxic, paralyzing drug. When you spend your entire life building successful companies by fixing broken systems, you arrogantly believe you can fix broken people, too. I viewed my marriage as a complex algorithm that just needed the right patience to optimize. More dangerously, I believed Elliot's private apologies. I hadn't yet learned that apologies without changed behavior are just manipulation. Some old money families don't want new members, and they certainly don't want to be fixed. They only want fresh, resilient targets to absorb the generational toxicity they refuse to address themselves. The wedding was entirely funded by the Sterlings, which meant it was entirely controlled by a leaner. I was not a bride. I was a prop in a high-society theatrical production designed to project the Sterling family's enduring dominance. We were married at the country club they had belonged to since 1952. My mother sat in the second row, looking incredibly uncomfortable in her desperately pressed modest suit. When the photographer arranged the family portraits, Vivienne literally stepped in front of my mother, blocking her from the camera's view. "Oh, just squeezing in for the symmetry," Vivienne had chirped brightly, holding her designer clutch directly over my mother's folded hands. I had gently asked the photographer to take another shot. Eleanor interrupted. "We're losing the good light, Cassandra. Let's keep moving. Time is money." That phrase, time is money, it became the soundtrack of my marriage. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I lived in their orbit. We bought a house 10 minutes down the road from the estate, funded by Elliot's trust. I begged him to let us buy something smaller, something we could afford purely on our own salaries. "Why?" Elliot had asked, genuinely confused. "The trust is there for exactly this reason, Cassie. It's silly to struggle when we don't have to." But the money was a collar, and Eleanor held the leash. Because the trust purchased our home, Eleanor kept a key. Because she kept a key, she entered whenever she pleased. I would come home from 12-hour days at my rapidly expanding firm to find my furniture rearranged, my throw pillows replaced with ones that matched the historical integrity of the architecture, and my mail neatly sorted into piles on the kitchen island. "I'm just trying to help you maintain things," Eleanor told me when I finally confronted her one rainy Tuesday. "You work such long, strange hours on your little computer projects." A home needs a woman's organizing touch. My little computer projects. By the end of my second year of marriage, Pinnacle Data had secured a $70 million Series B funding round. We had acquired 2 regional logistics competitors. I had 140 employees. I was flying to London and Tokyo to close international freight contracts. But to the Sterlings, I was an eccentric workaholic running an unprofitable blog under my married name, Cassandra Miller. They never bothered to truly vet me, and I actively maintained that firewall. In the corporate world, I operated strictly under my maiden name, Cassandra Rostova. My equity was shielded behind blind trusts and layers of corporate holding companies to protect my privacy from opportunistic investors. The Sterlings, addicted to the illusion of their own superiority, simply never Googled deep enough. I didn't hide it out of shame. I hid it because when you are building a castle brick by brick, you don't invite people who carry sledgehammers to the construction site. The extent of their interference became violently clear during a critical conference call. I was in my home office, negotiating a major server contract with a firm in Tokyo. Suddenly, the entire network dropped dead. The screens went black. I sprinted downstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs, terrified of losing a deal that took 6 months to build. I found Eleanor in the hallway. She had physically unplugged the main fiber optic router. "Eleanor," I choked out, staring at the dead cables in her perfectly manicured hand. What did you just do? I am in the middle of a global negotiation. She didn't flinch. She just smiled that terrible, patient smile. The vibrations from this machine were disturbing the energy of the antique Ming vase, Alina said smoothly. Your little computer hobby can wait, Cassandra. We must respect the historical integrity of this house. She patted my shoulder condescendingly and walked into the kitchen. I stood there, trembling with a rage so profound it made my vision blur. I lost that Tokyo contract. $2.4 million gone because my mother-in-law cared more about a dead piece of porcelain than the livelihood I was desperately bleeding to build. And when I told Elliot what happened that evening, begging him to finally take his mother's key away, he just massaged his temples. She means well, Cassie, he sighed, perfectly programmed to protect her. You can always find another freelance client online. Don't make this a family war over a piece of plastic. I had learned early on that any success I achieved was immediately weaponized. When I bought myself a new Audi, Harrison cornered me at a family barbecue. Upgrading the car, I see, Harrison sneered, flipping a burger on the grill. Elliot's trust must have dispersed the dividends early. Just make sure you don't get too accustomed to the luxury. The market is increasingly volatile. I looked at him. Through Pinnacle's advanced predictive analytics, I knew exactly what sectors were currently hemorrhaging behind closed doors. The market isn't volatile, I said quietly, taking a sip of sparkling water. But certain sectors are definitely facing aggressive federal scrutiny, especially pharmaceutical tech. If I were you, I'd stay far away from Pelio's pharmaceuticals. Harrison froze mid-flip. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing into cold, arrogant slits. For a fraction of a second, raw panic flashed across his face, quickly buried under layers of Ivy League entitlement. And what exactly would an administrative assistant know about institutional healthcare investments? Harrison mocked loudly, ensuring the entire patio could hear him. Did you read a scary article on a blog this morning, Cassie? Leave the heavy financial lifting to the men who actually went to business school. He assumed I was guessing. And Elliot, standing 3 feet away drinking a craft beer, didn't correct his brother-in-law. She just reads the news, Harrison, Elliot said neutrally, expertly avoiding the truth. That was the deepest wound. Not the cruelty, but Elliot's cowardice. He allowed them to rewrite reality because correcting them would require conflict, and Elliot was allergic to conflict. He weaponized his silence, letting me take the hits so he didn't have to. I pressed my palm against the cool steering wheel of that Audi later that night, sitting alone in our driveway. The engine was off, but the heater was still ticking. The isolation settled into my bones like frost. I was married, structurally attached to an entire sprawling family, and yet I had never been more profoundly alone. If you're still with me, hit subscribe now, because this is the moment I stopped waiting for them to accept me and started quietly digging their graves. The turning point wasn't a shouting match. It wasn't a physical altercation. It was the horrific, quiet realization of my total erasure, executed through a series of 203 blocked communications. In the fall of our 3rd year of marriage, my mother suffered a massive stroke. The hospital in Akron called me at 4:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. I packed a suitcase in absolute terror, booked the earliest flight out of JFK, and left Elliot a frantic note on the kitchen counter because he was deep asleep. I stayed in Akron for 4 agonizing weeks. I sat in a sterile, greenlit ICU room watching the monitors beep, holding my mother's fragile, unresponsive hand. I ran my multi-million-dollar company from a cracked iPad in the hospital cafeteria, whispering orders to my CFO, Sarah, while eating stale vending machine pretzels. During those 4 weeks, I called Elliot's cell phone every single day. I needed my husband. I needed to hear his voice. I needed someone to tell me the world hadn't entirely stopped spinning. Every single call went straight to voicemail. At first, I thought he was in a client meeting. Then I thought his phone was broken. I texted him. I sent emails. I called the landline at his office. Nothing. Absolute, deafening radio silence. After 2 weeks, desperate and deeply confused, I called the main line of the Sterling estate. Alina answered on the second ring. "Alina, it's Cassie," I choked out, fighting tears in front of the hospital vending machines. "Is Elliot okay? I haven't been able to reach him for 14 days. My mother, she's not waking up." "Oh, Cassandra," Alina sighed. It wasn't a sigh of sympathy. It was the sigh of a grandmother dealing with a toddler who refused to nap. "Elliot is incredibly stressed at the firm right now. The quarterly reports are due. He simply cannot handle emotional hysteria right now. I thought it best he focus on his career." "Hysteria?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "My mother is dying. And we sent a beautiful floral arrangement last week," Alina replied crisply. "White lilies, very tasteful. Elliot needs his space, Cassandra. You chose to abandon your marital home to go back to Ohio. We are managing his stress in your prolonged absence." She hung up. I pulled my phone from my ear and stared at the dark screen. The realization hit me with the physical force of a concrete block dropping on my chest. She had blocked my number on his phone. Later, through a forensic trace my own tech security team quietly ran on our shared family plan, I found the exact math. 147 phone calls, 56 text messages, all of them intercepted, deleted, or blocked by the parental controls Alina had secretly installed on Elliot's device, treating a 35-year-old man like a heavily monitored teenager. 203 desperate attempts to reach my husband, annihilated. My mother passed away on a rainy Thursday morning. I arranged the funeral alone. I paid for the casket alone. I stood by the open grave in Akron, Ohio, surrounded by my mother's diner coworkers and my company's executive team who had flown in to support me. Elliot didn't show up. The Sterlings didn't show up. When I finally returned to Connecticut 2 weeks later, exhausted and hollowed out by grief, I walked into our house to find Elliot sitting on the sofa watching a golf tournament. He looked up, vaguely surprised. "Cassie, you're back." "I am back," I said, my voice dead, devoid of all emotion. "How is your mom doing?" he asked casually, not pausing the television. I stared at him, the man I had married. The man who had laughed so easily in a hotel lobby 3 years ago. He had no idea. His family had insulated him so completely from my reality that he didn't even know his mother-in-law was buried 6 feet under the frozen Ohio dirt. "She passed away, Elliot, 2 weeks ago. I buried her on a Thursday." Elliot's face went completely pale. The remote control slipped from his hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "What? Cassie, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me?" "I called you 147 times," I said smoothly. The factual recital felt like ice water in my veins. "I texted you 56 times. Your mother blocked my number. And you lacked the basic curiosity to wonder where your wife was for a month." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. Screaming implies you still have hope that someone will hear you. I had run entirely out of hope. I thought you just needed space," Elliot stammered, visually shrinking into the sofa cushions. "Mom said you told her you needed a break, that you were stressed about your little consulting business." I turned around and walked upstairs. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave him that night. That would have been too easy. That would have allowed them to control the narrative, to say the crazy, unstable girl from Akron couldn't handle the pressure of marriage and ran away. No. If I was going to leave, I was going to burn the illusion of their superiority to the absolute bedrock. That night, alone in the guest bedroom, I opened my laptop. I didn't log into my personal email. I logged into the secure, encrypted server of Pinnacle Data Solutions. I messaged Sarah, my chief financial officer and the closest thing I had to a mentor since my mother died. "Send me everything we have on the Sterling Family Trust. Specifically, Richard Sterling's commercial real estate portfolio. I want every debt structure, every leveraged asset, every private equity note." "Dig deep," Sarah replied 3 minutes later on it. "Give me 48 hours. Are we hunting, Cassie?" "Yes," I typed back. "We are hunting." The Sterling family projected an image of invincible, generational wealth. They drove imported luxury SUVs, vacationed exclusively in Nantucket, and threw charity galas that cost more than a suburban house. But wealth is an illusion unless you can see the balance sheet. And nobody understood balance sheets better than Sarah Jenkins and my data analytics algorithms. 48 hours later, sitting in my minimalist executive office in Manhattan, Sarah slid a thick black leather folder across my glass desk. She had a grim, purely professional smile on her face. In her 20 years of corporate finance, she had seen every flavor of fraud imaginable, but this one clearly amused her. "It is a house of cards, Cassie," Sarah said, tapping the heavy leather folder. "Painted to look like marble, but structurally, a strong gust of wind will take the whole thing down." I opened the folder. The numbers glowed sharply against the white paper. Let me reconstruct that afternoon exactly as Sarah laid it out for me. The Sterling's primary holding company, Sterling Heritage Estates, was deeply, violently underwater. Richard had been bleeding cash for 6 years, taking out massive, high-interest loans against the family's legacy commercial properties to fund their outrageously inflated lifestyle and cover up a series of catastrophic investments in dying retail sectors. "Here is the kill shot," Sarah said, leaning forward and pointing a manicured finger at page 14. 2 years ago, Richard took out a desperate $14 million commercial credit line. He used the family estate, the main house in Connecticut, as collateral. The lender was Vanguard Equity Partners. I scanned the loan documents. "And the interest rate is variable." "Predatory," Sarah corrected. "It was a desperation move, and here is where it gets interesting. The balloon payment on that $14 million is due in exactly 45 days. If they default, Vanguard has the right to seize the estate and liquidate the commercial portfolio." "They don't have $14 million in liquid assets," I said softly, the reality dawning on me. "They don't have $1,400 in liquid assets," Sarah replied dryly. "But it gets worse. Look at the subsidiary trust run by Harrison." I flipped to the section detailing Harrison's management. Harrison, the Yale-educated enforcer. The man who constantly belittled my $45,000 administrative salary. "Harrison has been siphoning money out of the Sterling Family Charitable Foundation," Sarah explained, her voice dropping into a register of pure, lethal professionalism. "He's been using the charity's tax-exempt funds to make high-risk options trades on pharmaceutical tech. He's front-running FDA announcements. It's textbook insider trading. Wire fraud, embezzlement, securities fraud," I murmured, staring at the damning paper trail. "He's leaving digital fingerprints everywhere. He thinks he's invisible because he's rich," Sarah noted. "A classic fatal error." I closed the black leather folder. The leather felt cool against my palms. For 3 years, they had made me feel small. They had made me apologize for existing. They had blocked my access to my own husband while my mother died, all while clutching their pearls and quoting their pedigree. "Sarah," I said quietly, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Manhattan skyline. "How much liquid capital does Pinnacle currently have in our acquisition war chest?" Sarah didn't even blink. $280 million, fully cleared. "Why?" "I want you to initiate a stealth acquisition of Vanguard Equity Partners' distressed debt portfolio," I commanded. "Use the secondary markets. Route the capital through our offshore shell companies. I don't care how long it takes, but I want Pinnacle Holdings to quietly purchase the paper on Richard's $14 million credit line without triggering SEC red flags." Sarah's eyes widened. She stared at me, the math clicking into place in her brilliant mind. "Cassie, quietly absorbing that much institutional debt. That could take 8 months of aggressive, surgical maneuvering before we hold the primary note on their estate." "Then we take 8 months," I said, "and package all the evidence of Harrison's embezzlement for the Securities and Exchange Commission, but do not transmit it until I give the absolute final order." "Cassie," Sarah said softly, "this is nuclear." "No," I replied, standing up and buttoning my blazer. "It's karma. The universe is just using my bank account to deliver it." For the next 8 months, I played the ultimate role of the devoted, invisible wife. I let Alina rearrange my kitchen. I smiled when Harrison made jokes about the volatile tech market. I sat quietly beside Elliot while he watched golf. I sat at their dining table, eating their food, knowing with absolute, terrifying certainty that I owned the chair I was sitting on, the table the food rested upon, and the very walls shielding them from the wind. I was patient, because I knew Thanksgiving was approaching, and the Sterlings loved an audience for their holidays. The grandfather clock in the Sterling hallway chimed 8:00 p.m. Back in the dining room, the silence was suffocating. The tension was thick enough to crack teeth. $45,000 a year, Harrison repeated, his voice losing a fraction of its smug elasticity, failing to understand why I wasn't weeping or apologizing for my pitiful existence. That is what the public records show for Cassie Miller Consulting. You are absolutely correct, I said calmly, finally breaking the silence. I picked up the heavy silver Montblanc pen. I didn't click it. I just rolled it between my fingers. Cassie Miller Consulting filed tax returns for $45,000 last year. It is a shell LLC I maintain strictly for legacy tax purposes. I looked directly at Harrison. Now pull out your phone, Harrison. I want you to search a different name. Harrison scowled, gripping his linen napkin. I am not playing games with you, Cassandra. This is a legal proceeding. Search the name Pinnacle Data Solutions, I said. My voice was no louder than a whisper, but it sliced through the dining room like a scalpel. No one moved. Eleanor's manicured hand froze inches from her crystal goblet. Please, I insisted. It's fine. I have all the time in the world. I will wait. Elliot, looking pale and deeply nauseous, slowly pulled his phone from his blazer pocket. He typed with trembling thumbs. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I watched the artificial color violently drain from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. What is this? Elliot whispered, his voice cracking violently. He wasn't asking me. He was asking the universe. Read it, Elliot, I commanded gently. Pinnacle Data Solutions. Elliot stammered, his eyes darting frantically between his screen and my face. A global logistics analytics firm, founded 2018. CEO, Cassandra Rostova Miller. Estimated market valuation, $1.8 billion. The word billion hit the mahogany table and detonated. Richard dropped his heavy silver fork. It clattered against his bone china plate, a sharp, ringing sound of absolute defeat. Eleanor's mouth opened slightly. For the first time in 3 years, the matriarch of the Sterling family was paralyzed by visible, unadulterated shock. Her brain, programmed entirely by pedigree and class assumptions, simply could not process the data. That's a lie, Vivienne shrieked, her theatrical calm shattering into hysterical fragments. That's a complete fabrication. Anyone can write a tech article on the internet. It was on the cover of Forbes last month, Vivienne, I said clinically. You probably missed it. You focus mostly on Vogue. I reached under my chair and retrieved my dark leather bag. I unclasped it and pulled out a manila folder, setting it precisely on top of the 14-page post-nuptial agreement. Since we are executing rigorous due diligence tonight, I continued, speaking to the room as if testifying before a jury, I believe it is only fair that we put all the cards on the table. I opened the folder. 2 years ago, Sterling Heritage Estates took out a $14 million commercial credit line. The collateral for that loan was this exact house. The primary lender was Vanguard Equity Partners. Richard's face contorted into a mask of pure terror. How? How do you possess access to my private financial obligations? Because after 8 months of quiet, systematic acquisition, I said, leaning forward, the iron finally showing through my voice, Pinnacle Holdings executed a stealth buyout of Vanguard's debt portfolio. I slid a single piece of thick, watermarked paper across the table toward him. As of that acquisition, Richard, I own Vanguard, which means I hold the note on your massive, defaulted credit line. The balloon payment was missed last Tuesday. Technically, your entire empire is currently in default. I own the paper on the walls surrounding you. You bought my bank, Richard wheezed, clutching his chest. I bought the bank, I confirmed softly. This is illegal. Harrison barked, slamming his fist onto the table, his Yale lawyer facade completely disintegrating. "This is clear financial sabotage. We will tie you up in litigation for a decade." I turned my gaze slowly to Harrison, the enforcer, the man who mocked my car and belittled my salary. "I wouldn't throw threats around about legality, Harrison," I said. My voice was completely flat, emotionless, a pure recital of facts. "Not when you've been routing tax-exempt funds from the Sterling Charitable Foundation through an offshore shell company in the Caymans to place illegal pre-market call options on Pelio's pharmaceuticals." If the word billion had detonated a bomb, the word Pelio's sucked all the remaining oxygen out of the atmosphere. Harrison physically recoiled, as if he had been shot. All the blood rushed from his face. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, wet gasp emerged. "You rooted $2.4 million, I continued calmly, reading from the document Sarah had prepared. "You used your father-in-law's charity as a private hedge fund. You left digital footprints across 3 different banking sectors. Our algorithm flagged the anomalies during the Vanguard acquisition audit." Vivienne stared at her husband in horror. "Harrison, what is she talking about? Tell me she is lying." Harrison didn't look at her. He stared at the folder in my hand, absolutely paralyzed by the inescapable gravity of his own hubris. "I compiled an extensive 200-page forensic audit," I told the room, "and I authorized my legal team to voluntarily submit it to the whistleblower division of the Securities and Exchange Commission 6 days ago." "You ruined us," Alina whispered. Her voice was thin, fragile, finally matching her true internal state. The icy facade had completely crumbled, revealing the desperate, terrified old woman hiding underneath. "You sat in my house, pretending to be a fool, and you plotted to ruin my family." "I did not plot anything, Alina," I said, standing up from my chair. I looked down at her. "I did not create your husband's massive debt. I did not force Harrison to commit federal wire fraud. I did not intercept 203 desperate phone calls between a wife and her husband while her mother lay dying." I pointed at the post-nuptial agreement. "You called me here tonight. You printed 14 pages of threats on your expensive cream paper. You brought the match. I just built a structural firewall." Outside the thick pane-glass windows, the distinct, grinding crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. Not one vehicle, 3 heavy, synchronized SUV tires rolling up the circular driveway. "That will be the federal compliance team," I announced, picking up my bag and buttoning my coat. "I advocated for them to conduct the initial interview at the estate rather than dragging you out in handcuffs from your corporate offices on a Monday morning. I thought it would be more dignified." I looked at Harrison. "You're welcome." I walked toward the massive front door. Elliot finally found his legs. He stumbled out of his chair and grabbed my arm. "Cassie, please," Elliot pleaded, tears explicitly running down his aristocratic face. "You can't just leave. I didn't know. I swear to God, I had no idea about the debt or Harrison or the phone calls. I was blind." I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked into his eyes. "I know you were blind, Elliot," I said softly, feeling the deep, hollow sadness settling where my anger used to be. "But blindness is a choice when you refuse to open your eyes. You let your mother build a cage around us, and you handed her the key because it was easier than defending me." I gently pulled my arm free. "I will be at the plaza in Manhattan," I said. "My attorneys will be in contact regarding the divorce. Keep the Audi." I walked out the heavy mahogany door. The November air hit me like a slap of freezing water, clean, sharp, and brutally honest. 3 black SUVs with government plates were parked perfectly in the driveway. A man in a dark federal windbreaker stepped out and gave me a brief, professional nod. I nodded back. I climbed into the back of my waiting car. As the driver navigated back through the wrought iron gates, I didn't look back at the glowing windows of the estate. I didn't want to see the ruin. I just wanted the quiet. 6 months later, the Sterling family's collapse was quiet, brutal, and entirely algorithmic. Harrison took a plea deal to avoid 20 years in federal prison. He surrendered his law license, paid a massive $4 million restitution fine, and was currently serving 36 months in a minimum security facility in upstate New York. Vivienne filed for divorce the day after his sentencing, terrified of losing her social standing. Richard's real estate empire was quietly dissolved. My company, Pinnacle Holdings, didn't foreclose out of malice. We simply refused to extend the predatory terms Vanguard had set. We restructured the debt, forced Richard to liquidate his massive commercial portfolio at market value, and left him with just enough to maintain a small, modest condominium in Hartford. The grand Connecticut estate, the ancestral fortress of the Sterling family, was sold at auction. I didn't buy it. I didn't want the ghosts. I let it be purchased by a tech billionaire from California who immediately gutted the interior to build an indoor basketball court. I found an ironic comfort in that. As for Elliot, we finalized the divorce rapidly. Without the iron grip of Aliner's interference, the process was remarkably clean. I didn't take a single dime of his remaining trust fund. I just took my freedom. He asked to meet me one last time at a quiet coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan. He looked completely different. He had lost the arrogance that came from generational protection. He wore a simple sweater, not a tailored blazer. I go to therapy twice a week now, Elliot told me, wrapping both hands around his coffee mug. He didn't ask for me back. He knew better. I'm trying to figure out how I lived 35 years without ever having an original thought that didn't come from my mother. It's a process, I said gently, and I meant it. I hope you figure it out, Elliot. She sent me a letter, he admitted, looking down. My mother. She blamed you for everything. For Harrison, for the debt, for the house. She said you orchestrated a master plan to destroy us because you were jealous of our heritage. Does that bother you? I asked. Elliot shook his head slowly. No, because I finally read it and realized she's not a monster. She's just a fragile woman terrified of a world where her last name doesn't matter anymore. He slid an envelope across the table. I brought you this. I found it when we were packing up the Connecticut house. I thought you should have it. I opened the envelope. It was a photograph, a Polaroid from the logistics conference in Chicago, captured by a photo booth. Elliot had spilled coffee on his shirt. I was laughing, my head thrown back. We were both just kids, completely unaware of the violent gravity we were about to walk into. I am sorry, Cassie, Elliot said. His voice broke, and for the first time in 4 years, I knew he actually understood the weight of the word. I am so incredibly sorry I didn't protect you. Sorry is a word. It is a starting place, not a finish line. But hearing it from him, stripped of his family's armor, allowed something tight and heavy inside my chest to finally uncoil. Thank you, Elliot, I said. I placed the photograph in my bag and stood up. I didn't destroy the Sterling family. I just removed the artificial supports holding up their lies and let gravity do the rest. Karma is not revenge delivered by a villain. It is simply the universe delivering the exact consequences you spent your entire life trying to evade. I walked out of the coffee shop and onto the busy, chaotic streets of Manhattan. The sun was breaking through the high-rises. Love does not require you to dissolve yourself. Generosity is not the same as surrender. And protecting the life you have built, the quiet, the safety, the hard-earned peace, is not selfishness. It is the basic dignity of existing in the world as a full person, rather than a convenience for someone else's comfort. I pulled out my phone. I didn't have 203 missed calls. I just had one text message from Sarah, my CFO. Q3 projections look brilliant. Take the rest of the day off, Cassie. You've earned the quiet. I smiled, locking the screen. And for the first time in 3 years, I walked home to an empty house that belonged entirely to me. Thank you for listening. Yellow Heart.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.